My uh, my title is Associate Dean of Curriculum and Faculty Development. So my general areas of responsibility include professional development for faculty, which would include orientation of new faculty. I'm the primary administrative academic contact for transfer students. I have oversight of the curriculum, honors, emerging scholars programs, entrepreneurship, pre-health, pre-law, all of those sorts of things. I'm the main contact for accreditation and assessment purposes. Let's see. I supervise our class dean structure as well as our student support services, which is a government-funded TRIO program, as well as writing and tutoring assistance. I am a professor of economics, and I am also currently chair of the Department of Philosophy and Religion.
Okay, that's quite an extensive list there.
Because other duties as assigned is a part of every job description.
Right. So what have you noticed? What have you run into being a professor and then being higher up in the college? Like, what are some of the challenges of COVID?
So for faculty, I think it's coming to grips with the fact that they can't do what they're best at. In the spring, when we moved to emergency remote teaching, it literally was get into the lifeboat as fast as you can. And so getting through the semester was really the bar that people were trying to get past. I think for students, it was the same thing. As it became clear that, COVID was still going to be with us this academic year, faculty had the opportunity to spend a little bit more time, be more thoughtful, more intentional about their pedagogy before the fall semester began. And I think a number of faculty have discovered that things that they've tried technologically are things that they may probably continue after we go back to whatever sort of normalcy will exist later, right? I mean, I should back up, like Simpson, I mean, Central is entirely residential, roughly 1,200 students. We have been in person for the fall and for the spring, both faculty and students, except in conditions where there are ADA accommodations to allow them to teach or learn remotely. When students go in and out of quarantine or isolation, faculty will kind of put their feet in both worlds and teach people in the classroom as well as over Zoom while students are away. And I think the hardest thing for the faculty has been that it is so much more emotionally and intellectually taxing to teach this way than what they're used to doing, right? To try to optimize two different types of pedagogy in the same classroom, to literally rethink everything they do in order to make it appealing to this sort of method of transmission. I think even as a student, you probably recognize that it's just it is more tiring to be on class, to take classes over Zoom. So I think the amount of mental and emotional labor that faculty have gone through is fairly significant. I think the same thing can be said for staff. Staff members on campus are, the primary face of interaction with students, and in some ways, they're probably the most anxious people on campus in terms of not wanting to get COVID, right? Because they do interact with students all the time. Now we have put together a series of protocols that I think have been really, really useful. they've kept us going. I think to date we've had 5 positive cases, and things are going well. For the students, it's interesting that you want to separate first year from all others. I think the quick move to emergency remote in the spring kind of braced upper class students for what is to come. And so I think their adjustment has been okay. For first year students, as you indicate, have no frame of reference except for what they went through. But there were a number of high schools that went in person as long as they possibly could and didn't face that kind of an abrupt adjustment. And the onset of placing the pandemic on top of the normal acculturation process that a first year student is going to go through on campus, the anxiety from going from being, the 12th graders on campus to the first year student is, I think, has created havoc with a number of first year students. The higher education literature, both popular and research focused, there's been all kinds of talk about issues related to mental health, and all of that's real. We've had students whose parents have died from COVID, but they couldn't go home, right? Students whose grandparents have passed away, but they couldn't go home to see them ahead of time. So it's these things they're in over and above anything that any other normal first year student would have had to deal with. And so there is a real need to, again, be more intentional about reaching out to students and making sure that that they're okay. So it's this is simply an environment in which we need to maintain communication more than we ever have.
Do you think that's possible? Oh, like I think a lot of students are thankful for Zoom. I mean, I thought about this earlier in the semester when it was still snowing out. I was like, there's no way we're gonna have ever have a snow day anymore because we have. It's not possible. Well, I've talked to a lot of students and they seem to be a little fed up with Zoom. I understand it's a great tool and it's going to be where the world is going, but it's still not that face-to-face. You don't get that social cues. I think that's one of the toughest things with the mask and probably affects mental health. I would say I feel less likely to approach people because of the mask.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you think about the reason that a student would go to Simpson or would go to Central, be over and above, a place like Iowa State, University of Iowa, they're typically, they express in some form the desire to develop relationships with faculty, the desire to be, quote, more than just a number, to be able to talk with your faculty outside of the classroom, to create mentoring relationships. These things are much more difficult to do over Zoom and with a mask than in person, right? You and I are having this conversation now. I just got off of a meeting with a group of colleagues from around the country for a project we're working on, and it's useful, but it's not a perfect substitute for the kinds of face-to-face interactions that we're used to, right? You're, to a great extent, it may be hard for me to identify all of your body language, which I would see far more clearly if you were in my office. It's more detached, right? So it's easier to be a little bit more anonymous when we're over Zoom. Um, yeah, and we could have had access to Zoom before all of this, right?
Yeah.
I mean, COVID helped us understand the possibilities, but
Yeah.
we could have created Zoom conference opportunities before COVID, and we could have avoided snow days,
Mm-hmm.
right? But this is, yeah, it's one of those things that just kind of happened. But I think that students, um, this may be part of the reason why places like Simpson Central were able to stay open with reasonably few um, positive cases, is that the students desired that kind of interaction. And if they desire that kind of interaction, they're going to do what it takes in order to keep that interaction, right? I don't know what it was like at Simpson, but at the very beginning of the semester, there were some fairly draconian restrictions in the residence halls, at least for the first couple of weeks until we kind of get past that um, that period in which you may be infectious, and then we can kind of slowly lift some of those back. And you know, students followed it. It wasn't, they may have grumbled to their friends, but that was the price of being able to be here. And so, you know, yes, we have to do Zoom, but to the best that we can, we'll minimize how much we use it.
Yeah.
So
have you made more of a conscious effort, and this could be in your personal life with family members, friends, but then into your work life as well, students that you know, other faculty, are you trying to reach out more? Is that something you've thought about as this thing has now progressed to be damn near almost a year long? I
yeah,
remember when it first happened, I thought it was going to be 2 weeks, and we were gonna go back to normal life, and here we still are.
you should read James Barrie's The Great Influenza about the 1918-19 influenza. Um, the parallels are phenomenal. So anyway, that's just for you. No, I have been. Um, I went to a meeting over in our student center yesterday. That was or Friday. It was just across the pond. Um, and I commented that that was the first time I had intentionally walked to that building, probably since October. Um, and there are people that I haven't seen in a long time, right? I try to contact my father every day. I haven't seen my father in almost 2 years, partially because of the nature of this position, but I missed my window,
Mm.
right? Before everything got shut down, right? He's in assisted living and they don't accept visitors. And so it's you do what you can. It's again, it's not the same. It bothers me a whole lot, but um, you try to maintain those kinds of relationships as best as you can. Our class deans are far more um, responsive to concerns about students or just students that they have regular contact with. They will maintain that week to week. Even the students that are in quarantine or isolation, we contact them every single day so that they don't feel like they've been forgotten, right?
Mm-hmm.
Faculty have bent over backwards trying to be accommodative for students you know, who get quarantined or who develop these kinds of mental health issues. Um, this is a difficult time, and there's no way that you can hold to everything the way you did it before in the amount that you did it before.
Mm-hmm.
So you realize that the only way you're going to survive is as a community.
Yeah. It's very hard to get that community aspect though for people to feel that. And that's something I noted not only for Corona. I already felt like before Corona, the world was obviously becoming more digitized, and that already separated us from each other. And then we have this thing, and I think it is kind of scary. I mean, there's a lot of people that I know that they had never had mental health issues, But now, I mean, going through this last year, now they know exactly what it's like. I had already gone through that stuff, but it's interesting how everybody has a collective, everybody's affected by this thing to some degree, and that's why it's interesting to get perspectives from all different types of people.
Well, yeah, and I think it does, it forces you to change behavior, right? When I for when we had our winter orientation before the start of the spring semester, I made the comment that who would have thought that going to Walmart for groceries would turn into some sort of moral dilemma,
Mm.
right? Um, my mother-in-law lives with us, and she's vaccinated now, thankfully. But my biggest fear was to do something here on campus that might cause her to be infected at home.
Mm.
And so you change your behavior in order to accommodate, you know, in order to accommodate loved ones, in order to accommodate people that that may be immunocompromised, um, to work with people who may be suffering for whatever reason. This this forces you to really rethink the way what you do. Again, even with technology, yeah, we are becoming more digitized, but we're going to see. I think we'll see two things um, over the next 10 years. So here's my prognostication that, yeah, we will become far more digitized than we ever have. But I think there's going to be a much greater focus on um, technology as a means to an end rather than simply the end in itself, right? Faculty have discovered that some things work really, really well on Zoom, and they're never going to go back to the way they did it in the classroom. And so they'll modify their pedagogy in order to account for that. But I also think that there's going to be a far more judicious use of technology that, um, even through all of this, I'm actually on social media less than I ever have been. And that's just, I'm not liking a lot of the things that I'm hearing right now. So it's
Probably,
just,
you
it's
know,
just, it's hard to, it's hard to continue all of that. And so I think people start to recognize that, yeah, this isn't a perfect substitute. So I need to see you face to face. Or FaceTiming with my dad isn't always great. So I'm going to do whatever I can to find a time so I can go see him. Um, it will be, if we use, as we use technology, it will be far more intentional because that's what this has taught us.
yeah, I think you're right. And then I also think, well, I guess maybe one of my bigger fears that unraveled after it's gone on for so long. I mean, you're trying to mitigate the spread, but do you think that there are more harmful long-term effects from the fact that we're not around each other? So like mental health, like the fact that we're not getting that stimulation and that human connection, which I think is ultimately a requirement for some form of happiness in our lives. We need other people. We need to be connected. We need to be band together. I guess that's my biggest fear is like how long could you continue this without having, then another serious epidemic on your hand because suicides have been rising exponentially since COVID started. That's terrifying.
Yeah. And I don't know, we've been talking about this a little bit here. Our expectation is that people will be wearing masks or encouraged to wear masks through the fall, if not through next spring.
Yeah.
And um, I wonder if we won't, in most places, go the way you see a lot of Asian nations have already gone, is that when you're in public, you put a mask on, or if you're sick, you put a mask on, out of deference to the people that you're going to be around. Um, so I think there may be a greater understanding of how you and I occupy space together, and we'll account for that. And so, yeah, there always will be another pandemic, but I think this time we're going to be a little bit more prepared for it.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about the negatives and the stresses. I guess we shine some light into where future might go. What do you think has been a benefit of COVID? Is it the fact that, like we said earlier, that you're more conscious about reaching out to other people? Or are there other things that you've noticed, like where you put your attention? I think some of the smart people took advantage of the fact that now we're going to have all this time to really work internally. You know, we're always distracted. Sorry, my cat is tweaking out. I don't know if you can hear him in the background. Um, Society in large, I think, is very distracted by a lot of different things. And so, you know, I think a lot of people, like you said, maybe became more intentional about their use of social media, or how they reach out to their loved ones. And maybe that was something that they didn't think about before. Are there positives that you've noticed since this has happened, and maybe it took a while to notice them?
Um, I don't know. I think this has taught us not to take the small things for granted, right? You know, again, it's going on 2 years since I've seen my father. I never thought that I would ever have gone this long. I mean, he lives fairly far away, so um, I don't get to see him that often, and it might be every 4 to 6 months, but 2 years. So I think one of the good things is that realization that you know there are a lot of things more important than the the busyness of what you're going through, right? Um, there will always be another project. There will always be the work. Um, but I want to go home because then I can actually see people and be with people.
Yeah.
Um, it has, I think, it has tried to teach society more about this notion of a social contract, right? That um, even if you didn't think that wearing a mask was particularly effective, you might still put one on because it might help others, if only psychologically, right? And but that's a recognition that it's not about you; it's about what you're doing for me. And so I'm hopeful that this will have taught us that lesson. The Again, I think one of the good things about COVID is that it has taught us the value of technology, again, as the means to the end rather than the end. Um, rather than adopting a technology because it's the cool new thing, you actually stop and ask yourself, what is it that I really want to accomplish, and what's the best way to do that? And if it's with technology, so much the better. If it's not, that's fine too. Um, yeah, and it has helped us understand that there doesn't have to be a snow day anymore.
I don't know. That might be a big disappointment for students and maybe even professors too. I'm sure professors look forward to having a few days off.
Well, and I both of our schools, I mean, we're all residential, so class goes on unless the faculty member can't get to campus, or it gets really, 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 really cold. Um, you know, the downside to that is, you live by technology, but you also die by it, right? So if there's a bad enough snowstorm to keep me from getting to campus, it might actually have played games with my internet too.
Yeah.
And so um, I may not have the ability to contact my students anyway. Um, so I mean, I think that there are there are some good things that have come out of all of this. So yeah, I'll leave it there.
I was going to ask you, had it kind of just this whole discussion made me think of The Social Dilemma. It's on Netflix. It's a documentary. Have you ever seen it?
I've not seen it, but I've heard of it.
Yeah. So I mean, it's kind of that. I mean, it goes into a lot more depth as what are the dangers of technology. But a lot of those guys talk about using it as a tool, not letting it use you. But it's kind of scary, how like the algorithms run and it keeps people on their apps, and it's also caused people to be further divided because you get more of the content in which you're liking. So that's not the only reason that we've become more polarized, but that's definitely a huge reason why we've become more polarized.
Yeah.
And again, to be isolated and out on your own, that you're not. I mean, I would say Zoom is obviously one step above like texting or like being on Snapchat or messaging over Facebook, but there's like tiers to human connection and talking with somebody. So when you're in person, like you said, you're going to look at my body language. You're going to see how I respond to you, my facial cues, social cues, nonverbal cues, all those things, and so you can't really have serious discussions over big topics on platforms like that because you don't actually, I mean, you don't know what they actually mean. You could completely interpret it along a different way. I mean, you're older than me, so I don't know if you've had this experience, but like you're texting somebody and it has like when they're texting back, it has like the three dots, but it takes them like 3 minutes and then they stop texting. Your mind fills the gaps like, oh, what are they saying? And that you just
Yep.
overthink the situation. So
Oh
uh,
yeah. No, um yeah, I have that problem all the time, and mostly because it's my fingers can't move that quickly. Um, but I had a thought and I lost it. Um, yeah, I agree with you. I'm sorry, I had a thought and I lost it.
it's okay.
Go
It
ahead.
happens to me all the time. I had one more, or at least one more question that I was thinking of as we were talking. I don't think your role wouldn't entail like bringing students into the college, but I assume you kind of serve as somebody that talks well about Central because you work there. Do you think that there may be a problem of getting more students, let's say in the fall, because Corona probably still going to be going on? Do you think students are going to be less likely to want to come here? That's why I still think like freshmen are sort of the interesting pod of all college students because they have nothing to compare it to. And it may seem like, oh, if we go through this another year, well, hey, that's 2 years of my college experience arguably down the drain. I mean, you're still here, you're still getting something out of it, but obviously it's not the same. It's not what they envisioned. A lot of these people that I've talked to, mainly freshmen, they have older siblings, they have older friends that hyped them up and said, "Hey, this is what college is like. You're gonna love the tailgating for the football games and the parties and all the extracurricular activities." And that's not the case this year.
Yeah. Um, I think that that question is answered differently at a small private than it would be at a larger public institution. Um, I think in general, students are going to self-select into particular places. Um, I think students that would do well at Central may not do well at larger institutions, and that's part of the reason they choose small privates. I think students that look for this kind of a residential experience will look at our ability to maintain that as best as possible. And those that are comfortable, they'll be fine. Um, those that are a little bit anxious, they come and they see that things are okay, and then they're okay. Um, you know, there was only a small fraction of our total student body that was ever quarantined in the fall. And so in general, absent a lot of athletic events and some of those other things that you mentioned, you know, students had the same kind of experience, right? Everyone, we didn't change class sizes, we changed spaces, right? So students got very different experiences. We were holding classes in the chapel and in the theater and in our auditorium, and because that's what you had to do. And you know, I think for the most part, students were fairly satisfied with what they were able to do. Um, I don't think you're going to get. I don't think you're going to get a lot of students at smaller schools saying, "I think I got jilted out of an experience," because the kind of experience that they can get here, they mostly got. Mostly.
Yeah.
Now, at if your intention is to go to Iowa City or to Ames, then you're looking for a particular type of interaction. Um, Again, the big games, the large social gatherings, that's not going to be an option. And so I think on a scale, that experience is probably far more curtailed than what you get at Central or Simpson.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I mean, there's some things that you can't do, but we can still work with service learning partners. We can still do internships. We're still doing our undergraduate research program in the summer. All of these things are still going on. We're just making sure that you're doing them all safely. Yeah. Right? You can still go to the basketball games. You just got to sit 6 feet apart from everybody. Right. So it's, yeah. We didn't have, in the fall, we didn't have, I'm going to start rambling here in a second. I'm sorry. We didn't have that many students that chose to defer enrollment from fall 20 to this spring. We had some, right? Obviously, that whose anxiety over not wanting to get COVID just led them to say, I want to wait until the spring. And then they enrolled in the spring. And we had some in the summer just say, nah, I've changed my mind. And they'll chalk it up to the pandemic. And that's fine. They may come back. They may end up at a different institution. It's something that you simply have to adjust to, because that's just going to happen.
Yeah. I think everybody's had to, I think that's like the prevailing theme for 2020 and 2021 is to adjust, but like humans hate that. Humans have expectations and they also like structure and routine. So I think that, I mean, even for me, and I mean, probably for a lot of people, like I would say even, up until last month, you're still gripping with it. You're still gripping because like it never really loses the frustration. You know what I mean? Like for me, I'm a senior, so this is not how I envisioned my last year to be. And I actually took a break from school. I took like a year and a half off and I came back to Simpson. And when my first year at Simpson, I lived with my parents because I grew up in Indianola. I graduated from here, so I'm like your typical townie. And I never got involved on campus like I wanted to. And so for when I came back, literally last year in the spring, I was like, I'm gonna make a stand to change that. And obviously that didn't happen.
Right.
But I guess then like my last question, not to try and go on a rant or like a rabbit hole, but so I mean, what sort of advice do, like when you have these conversations with faculty, staff, or even students, what's the advice? Like how can we boost morale? A lot of people talk about, looking towards the finish line or seeing like a silver lining or a light at the end of the tunnel. And, maybe that's vaccines. I don't know. It depends on how many people get vaccinated, but I mean, for you, like, how have you kept yourself going, and what would be your advice to other people?
When I um, when I speak with faculty, when I speak with students, um, and when I speak with staff, I include two questions. One is how are you, and what can I do to be helpful? The it's not meant to be self-serving. It's meant to, the former question is legitimate. How are you doing? Right? Because we know everyone is being affected by this. And if there's something that they feel the need to talk about, then they can talk about it. If I'm in a position to help them do something or to point them to a resource, then I'm going to do that. I think one of the ways to build morale specifically around the pandemic is to maintain those lines of communication. Um, the just recognizing that we all are in this, we all have the same issues, we're all going through the same things. It's helpful to remember that. And if I'm having a particularly bad day because um, I've done nothing but talk on Zoom and I'm exhausted and my throat's dry and I'm cranky and um, sometimes it helps for somebody to say, how are you? And I can just, depending on the individual, I can vent for a few minutes.
Yeah.
And then everything's fine. Um, but I think intentionally reaching out to people um, is the only way we're going to get through this. And not just over social media, right? That is still less impersonal than something like this.
Yeah.
Like less personal, more impersonal than something like this. To the extent that I'm able to just walk around campus just to see who's around, you know,
Yeah.
you make a point of saying hi to people. How are you doing? Um, you do that in the neighborhood, you do that at home. Um, the One of these days, we're going to be able to look back on this experience, and you want to make sure that you have kept up um, those kinds of conversations, because those are the things that people are going to remember. I'm going to remember the people who reached out to me and how are things going.
Mm-hmm.
So it is that, don't stop communicating, right? When students are struggling, either academically, mentally, whatever, um, the first sign that there's an issue is that they stop communicating. They stop communicating with the faculty member, with their advisor, with the class dean, their roommates, whatever. Um, and it's necessary to remind them. You have to keep talking, keep communicating, and we're eventually going to get through this.
Yeah. I think that's a good way. I think that's a good piece of advice, or at least to end this. So thank you for talking to me, Brian. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it was my pleasure. I appreciated the opportunity.
Okay. All right. Well,
All right.
great day. Get outside, enjoy the sunshine, and I will see you later.
All right. Take care, Cole. Thanks a lot.
Yep. See ya.